Have you ever sat through the airline safety demonstration, listening while wondering what snack they'll serve, when the flight attendant says something that sounds a little alarming? If the cabin loses pressure, oxygen masks will drop from the panel above you. Fair enough. That sounds reassuring. But then they casually add another detail. The oxygen flow will last for approximately 12 to 15 minutes. Only 15 minutes? You're telling me the airplane carries enough snacks for a 14-hour flight, but only enough oxygen for a quarter of an hour? That doesn't exactly inspire confidence. So why do the masks only work for such a short time? Are airlines trying to save money? Are the oxygen tanks incredibly tiny? Or did someone simply decide that 15 minutes sounded like a nice round number? As strange as it seems, the answer has nothing to do with cutting costs. That 15 minutes isn't just an estimate. It's one of the most important numbers in commercial aviation. The fascinating part is why it doesn't need to be any longer. Welcome to Past in Plain Sight. Today, we're uncovering the fascinating reason airplane oxygen masks only last about 15 minutes. We first need to take a trip to cruising altitude to understand why airplane oxygen masks only last about 15 minutes. Most commercial airplanes fly between 35,000 and 40,000 feet above the ground. That's incredibly high. At those altitudes, the air outside is far too thin for humans to breathe normally. There simply isn't enough oxygen. If the cabin weren't pressurized, passengers would quickly begin suffering from oxygen deprivation, a condition known as hypoxia. Your brain is especially sensitive to low oxygen. Without enough of it, people become confused, dizzy, sleepy, and eventually unconscious. Which is definitely not how you want your vacation to begin. Fortunately, airplanes have a clever solution. Cabin pressurization. Instead of making passengers breathe the thin air outside, the aircraft pumps and regulates air inside the cabin, creating conditions similar to being on a mountain rather than near the edge of space. Most of the time, passengers never even think about it. Everything works quietly in the background, until something goes wrong. In the rare event that the cabin suddenly loses pressure, the oxygen masks automatically drop from the ceiling. Now here's where many people imagine giant oxygen tanks hidden somewhere inside the aircraft. Surprisingly, that's usually not what's happening. On most commercial airliners, the passenger masks don't receive oxygen from large storage tanks. Instead, they use chemical oxygen generators. These are ingenious little devices that produce oxygen through a controlled chemical reaction. When you pull down on the mask, it activates the generator. Inside, chemicals begin producing breathable oxygen almost immediately. It's rather like lighting a very carefully designed candle, except instead of producing light, it produces oxygen. The reaction generates enough oxygen for roughly 12 to 15 minutes. Now you might be thinking, that still doesn't sound like very long. Here's the clever part. The masks aren't designed to keep you comfortable for the rest of the flight. They're designed to keep you alive while the pilots solve the real problem. The moment a cabin depressurization occurs, pilots begin what's called an emergency descent. Instead of continuing at 37,000 feet, they descend rapidly to a much lower altitude, usually around 10,000 feet. At that height, the outside air contains enough oxygen for most people to breathe normally without supplemental oxygen. In other words, the masks are buying time. Think of them like the spare tire in your car. You don't expect to drive across the country on it. You only need it long enough to reach somewhere safe. 15 minutes is generally more than enough time for a trained flight crew to descend to breathable altitudes. In fact, commercial jets are designed specifically with this procedure in mind. So when you hear that the oxygen masks only last about 15 minutes, don't think of it as a frightening limitation. Think of it as a perfectly timed emergency tool. The masks aren't meant to support an entire flight. They're designed to bridge the short gap between a sudden loss of cabin pressure and a safe altitude where everyone can breathe normally again. It's another example of aviation engineers solving a very specific problem with remarkable precision. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to Past in Plain Sight, and join us next time as we reveal another fascinating piece of history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.